Hello everyone, my name is Emma Stark and my special education presentation today will be on communication impairment. So what is communication impairment? According to the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, a communication impairment is defined as communication disorders such as stuttering, impaired articulation, language impairment, or a voice impairment that adversely affects a child's educational performance. What's important to note about the definition of communication impairment is that it is not limited to how a child speaks. It also includes how a child understands spoken language and how they react to that. Later on in my presentation, I will go through some of the different types of communication impairments, which includes a social communication skills with peers. So what are the causes of communication impairment? While some of the causes are developmental, there are others that are caused by outside factors. For example, while in the womb, a child can be affected by exposure to toxins such as alcohol or drugs, and that can result in a communication impairment. But a child can also be born with physical ailments, such as a cleft lip or palate. This can have an impact on the child's oral motor skills. A child may not be born with a communication impairment, but develop one due to a traumatic brain injury, as we have discussed in other presentations. Some of the other causations include abnormal brain development, genetic factors, and neurological disorders, also tumors in the area used for communication. So how frequent are communication impairments diagnosed in children? According to the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and the American Speech Language Hearing Association, of the 6,068,802 students receiving accommodations and services, 1,460,583, or approximately 20%, are receiving services due to a communication impairment. Communication impairment services are one of the most common services provided to students, especially the younger you are. While 20% of students are receiving services for communication impairments, 50% of those students are between the ages of 3 and 5. This is because during this age bracket, students are going to school for the first time and are being exposed to a new learning environment. Also, teachers are seeing how the students communicate with peers and may have some insight as to whether or not the student should receive services. While it is unknown, boys are more likely to be diagnosed with a communication impairment than girls. So the types of communication impairments. There are 5 main types of communication impairments. Each of these types has their own manifestations. These types include expressive language disorder, mixed receptive expressive language disorder, speech sound disorder, childhood onset fluency disorder, and social communication disorder. So the first one that I will be discussing is expressive language disorder. For students who have expressive language disorders, they have delays in communication development and will have problems speaking and with their fine oral motor skills. Students may have a harder time expressing themselves through language because they do not have the proper skills to do so. Students may be able to fully understand how language is supposed to be written or spoken, but they themselves physically cannot do it. As you can see, some of the prominent symptoms of expressive language disorder include below average vocabulary skills, improper use of tenses such as past, present, and future, problems making complex sentences, and problems remembering words. The picture that I used for this slide is a perfect example of how a student with expressive language disorder may speak. In this picture, the student is saying, not today, but before today, my teacher lent me the thingy, so I wondered. So as you can see, there is a lot of grammar mistakes, but also the but the pauses in between words. This example has all the symptoms that I have explained before. So the next communication impairment is mixed receptive expressive language disorder. This impairment presents itself as the student having problems expressing themselves via spoken language, but also having problems understanding spoken language. Similar to expressive language disorder, the student has problems speaking. But for this impairment, the student also has difficulties understanding what someone is telling them. In speech sound disorder, students have problems correctly pronouncing words or speaking. While it is normal for younger students to have problems pronouncing certain words with sharper consonants, speech sound disorder is usually diagnosed in students above the age of 8 because that age tends to be when students have learned how to pronounce the sound the letters make. This impairment can be further defined by its two main categories: speech or articulation impairments and sound or phonological impairments. Each have their own manifestations, but a student can have symptoms from both categories. In speech impairments, manifestations include leaving off sounds from words, so for example, saying coo instead of school, adding sounds to words, such as saying play instead of play, changing the sounds in words, like saying thith instead of this, and swapping out sounds in words, so saying wadio instead of radio. In sound impairments, manifestations include saying one syllable in a word, such as saying bay instead of baby, repeating the same syllable for one word, such as saying wah-wah for water. This is very common in infants when they say ba-ba, wah-wah, things like that. Leaving consonants out of words, such as saying mass instead of mask, because they have the hard time saying the hard consonant at the end, and changing certain consonants in words, like saying tat instead of mat.